Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video. So I recorded the video that's going to be obviously following this in just one moment. I recorded it on about Saturday night, and within like half an hour of finishing recording and editing everything, President Trump came out and endorsed Mike Collins, who he called a MAGA champion in Georgia's Senate Republican runoff race. So in the video, I make several comments about how Trump has not yet endorsed Mike Collins or Dooley. Now, obviously, the news has changed, and Trump has officially endorsed Mike Collins. It doesn't change my winner prediction for this race really at all. That still remains the same, but it does change the margin of victory a bit. Where for the for the Republican primary, I said within 5 to 15% a likely win for Collins over Dooley. But now that Trump is endorsed, we may end up seeing something very similar to the state of Texas, where Ken Paxton just opened it up over John Cornyn. Now the possibility of Collins defeating Dooley by over 20 points in the state of Georgia is certainly a lot more possible. So it doesn't change my prediction from a winner standpoint. It does change it potentially on a margin standpoint. So I just want to get that out of the way now because, again, when I was doing the video, the news of Trump endorsing was not yet there. It did not happen yet. Now, obviously, the news has broke. You'll probably heard the news before you see this video, and I wanted to address it now at the start of the video before just to clear things up. But again, it does not change anything in terms of the winner perspective. Just know that going forward throughout the rest of the video. But yeah, that is it. Just want to give you that quick little update. Thank you again. Now, please enjoy the rest of the video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. So today we're looking at the 2026 Georgia U.S. Senate race. On Tuesday we have officially the Republican runoff race taking place between Mike Collins and Dooley, the two runner-ups from the primary back in May. The winner will be taking on Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff in the general election. So obviously this race plays a lot of very importance for the 2026 midterms. In today's video I'm going to break it all down, where the latest things stand in terms of polling and such. Also going to look at my own personal final election prediction for this race. So we can get into the video now. Looking at the map here, Mike Collins versus Dooley taking place on Tuesday. Their primary, which took place on I believe it was May 19th, 10:23 p.m. is when they made the decision. So May 19th, I believe it's 7 p.m. that polls close in the state of Georgia. And Mike Collins and Dooley, two Republicans, advance to the general election. Mike Collins is a U.S. representative in the state of Georgia. He does represent, I do believe, one of the districts up here. I can pull up the House map in Georgia as well, just to be clear. He represents this district, the Georgia 10th. Right here, right outside of the surrounding Atlanta area, is the 10th district, which is currently held by Mike Collins. And you see on the map here, Mike Collins did very well in this portion of the state of Georgia, running up a lot of numbers in these smaller rural areas, but parts of his district, parts just outside of his district, he did very, very well. Now, there's a very big caveat on this race that a lot of Republican primaries going on do not have, which is I'm recording this video just to be clear here early on Sunday, and President Trump has not officially weighed in yet on who he will endorse in this race, if he will endorse a candidate at all. And a thought did cross my mind earlier today. Obviously, Trump endorses, it can totally go completely opposite, but my thought was President Trump and Brian Kemp towards the start, I believe was it 2026 or even the end of 2025, met about Georgia and the U.S. Senate race and picking candidates that they both believe could coalesce strong Senate and governor candidates. And Brian Kemp went ahead and endorsed Dooley without President Trump's backing or without telling him and saying, I think we should both endorse him. Kemp just went ahead and endorsed Dooley anyway. And thus far, Trump has not weighed in yet on this race. And it'll be a good, interesting question because Collins finished in first place on the primary, getting 40.5%. Dooley got 30.19% for second place. Obviously, just doing quick math here, with everything remaining the same, Collins is closer to 50% than Dooley is. Collins would need roughly about 9.5% to break 50 from his prior results. Dooley would need right around a little bit under 20 points to get to 50%. Now, a very big caveat on this race, we'll get to Dooley in 1 second, is those who supported Buddy Carter in this race. The U.S. Republican Buddy Carter, who he's also, like Mike Collins, a House Representative member of the 1st District here. And in this 1st District, he represented the district over here in Savannah and Brunswick and really all along here. And Carter did very well in a lot of these areas of the state. And when you look at these voters, well, how are they ultimately going to go now that Carter is not in the top two? Will Collins or Dooley get them is going to be the ultimate question. You look, for instance, a county like Screven County. Carter finished in first place by a lot, getting 53.72%, but then Collins finished in second at 32%, Dooley finished in third. You could look at Bullitt County, same situation in terms of standing. Tattnall County, same thing. So when you look at these areas, this is going to be a very important area of the state in terms of how this primary ultimately shakes out. Because we saw Derek Dooley do very well surrounding Atlanta and the counties around it. In Fulton County, Dooley won it by roughly about, roughly about 13 points. Fulton County, obviously. Atlanta, a lot of population in this area. Got to remember, though, it's a Republican primary, not just a overall statewide election. So even though Fulton County is by far the largest at 846,000 votes, in a Republican primary, this only translated to 48,000 votes because, again, Fulton County, a lot more of a heavily Democratic area, not a whole lot of Republicans. There's still a good amount of them, but not as much when you combine, say, the rest of the rural areas throughout the state that Mike Collins did very well in. So that's why heading into this primary, you would assume, and I think a lot of people would assume that Mike Collins would have the advantage, as he did very well in the rural areas in the initial runoff, and also Buddy Carter's areas that he won, at least based on the results we had from this primary, showed Collins finishing in second place in most of these counties. Now with Carter out of the race, well, we'd probably see Collins be most likely to benefit from that. Now, Dooley will, I think, once again do well in the overall areas surrounding Atlanta, like Cobb County, which went for Dooley about 4,000 votes or so over Collins. We also saw Douglas County do so. But again, without Carter in the race, it's going to be a complete wild card what happens with Dooley and Collins in this race once it all shakes out. In terms of the runoff and where things currently stand on this, there hasn't been a whole lot of polling done. There was a poll from back in October 2025. We're going to essentially throw that out since that was way before the primary and such. But from May 20th onward, May 20th had a poll, Collins at 54%, Derek Dooley at 37%, 9% undecided. So if that poll is correct from Qantas Insights, essentially the race is over. There's no way for Derek Dooley to get above 50%, but Collins is already getting 54% of the vote. Now, Insider Advantage, Republican pollster from May 20th to 2021, found a much different finding. They showed Mike Collins in the lead, but Collins is at 46%. Derek Dooley was up at 41%, so overall 5-point lead for Collins over Dooley. So that is outside of the current margin of error. If you just were looking at it of adding Dooley's to Collins' number and staying from there, then Collins has a lead outside of that number. Now, of course, you can do the margin of error exercise where Collins goes down 3.5, Dooley goes up 3.5. Yes, Dooley technically would fall under the margin of error in that scenario, but still 13% undecided. And then JMC Analytics released a poll between May 26th and 27th, which showed Collins at 55%, Dooley at 39%, and 6% undecided. So right now, based on the early polling that we have, it definitely looks more like Mike Collins has the lead, even though Derek Dooley has the endorsement of Brian Kemp. I think if Dooley got the endorsement of President Trump and Brian Kemp, it may be enough to move this primary. But there's been 3 polls since May 20th, and 2 of them have him above 50% already, Mike Collins. Insider Advantage, even though he's not at 50% yet, still at 46% with 13% undecided. I just think when you look at the terrain of the primary map, and again, without Carter in the race, it'll be completely different, but when you look at the terrain here, even in the areas that we saw Mike Collins lose, like even when he lost to Dooley in Douglas County, he still finished in second place, a pretty strong second place. Without Carter in the race, I think a lot of these voters are going to decide who ultimately wins, and I think we're going to see Collins overall be the net benefit from that. I don't believe we've had any endorsements from Buddy Carter or President Trump yet in this race, so that's going to be a big wild card if things do develop tomorrow or in the next few days or so. But ultimately, it's going to be a very close primary and one that I think Mike Collins has a slight favorite over Derek Dooley in. So just in terms of what the map would look like, in terms of the prediction that I currently have, I think we're going to see, just imagine this, not the Senate map for a sec, this is just the primary map. I think we're going to see a situation where Mike Collins defeats Derek Dooley. I think he does it by more than 5 points, but I think he does it by under 15 points. So I would put it as a likely Republican win, something right around like a 55-45 margin up to like a 58-42. I think somewhere in that range where it falls under 15 points a little bit would be where I have Georgia for right now. So with that, we can now shift to the general election. That's obviously going to be one of the main things to talk about for the rest of the video as well, is the U.S. Senate race. The current Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff won his first term in 2020 in that runoff election following the 2020 presidential election. Now he is running for re-election for his second term, for his second 6-year term in the U.S. Senate. Now, the prediction side of things, I've been very bullish on Ossoff's chances so far. Only 2 rankings have it as toss-up. Race to the White House even has it as likely for the Democrats. Now, Sabato, Crystal Ball, Cook Political Report, and The Economist all have it as lean for the Democrats. In my own personal rankings, I'm more on the lean Democratic side as well. But this is where things stand right now. For Ossoff versus Collins, they're both competitive matchups in terms of where things currently stand, but Ossoff has a lead of 47.3%. And Collins is 43%, 9.7% other or undecided. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky because we talk about a lot in these videos for the midterms. Well, what is the election environment going to be like in 2026? And it is really interesting. And the best way we can kind of look at it, it's not going to be 100% a foolproof science because it's not going to always play out this way. But President Trump's current approval rating as the day I'm recording this video is 55.8% disapprove, 41.1% approve. Overall, a net of roughly about negative 14.7%. That's Trump's approval rating. Now, on the generic ballot, Democrats currently lead the Republicans by roughly about 4.4% on the generic ballot. Now, this generic ballot is usually talked about for Congress, so obviously when you talk about Congress, it's the House and the Senate, but typically this is used more for a House metric than the U.S. Senate metric. But let's just say, hypothetically, the national popular vote of the Senate map is a 4.4% Democratic win. Again, it doesn't really 100% work this way. Each Senate map is different, especially when you consider how many states are on the Senate map, because every Senate map is different. There's not an election up in all 50 states, so the numbers aren't going to line up 100% here. But just to show you a quick exercise of what this could look like, President Trump won the state of Georgia in 2024 by 2.2%. And in that election, Trump won the popular vote 49.8, Kamala Harris got 48.3. You're looking at roughly about a 1.5% win for Trump. So if you're looking at like a 4.4% win here for the Democrats, just going off the 2020 or 2024 presidential map, again, not exactly apples to apples, but you would shift that 1.5% plus an additional basically 2 points would bring you to like 6.3% of a shift towards the Democrats. It's essentially what it would be. So we could actually have an idea of what this could look like. We could shift it for the Democrats. Again, I said about 6.3%, but we'll shift it about 5 points. Then we'll do an additional point. And I mean, that would be a 6-point shift as it is. So we'll do this just for now, and then we'll add another point if we need to even further prove the point. Just in the 2024 presidential map, if we were to shift Georgia about that 6.6% swing from Trump winning the popular vote by about 1.5 to the Democrats winning it by 4.4, then the Democrat, Kamala Harris in the scenario, would have won the state by about 3.8% based on those numbers across all of the United States. Now, the Senate elections, again, are a little bit more tricky, where in 2020, the Senate map, which, again, did not include, this is where things get interesting as well, Ohio was not on the Senate map because that's going to be a special election for 2024, and the state of Florida was not included as well. That will also be a special election, so that's going to be swinging things a good amount as well. But Democrats got 47%, Republicans got 49.3%. So that's roughly about a 2.3% margin there. So again, for 4.4%, you have to shift it 2.3 plus another 4.4. You're looking at roughly, what's that, a 6.7% shift, I do believe. So again, we can even do it on this margin here, or actually we should probably do it from the runoff results, would probably be wiser, but even still, just from the initial ballot, if we wanted to shift it roughly, again, about 6.7%, and this one will do 7 points, then if that is the case, and that did happen, well then Jon Ossoff would have won against David Perdue in the initial round by about 5.2%. So just from a shift standpoint on what kind of race we're looking at here, again, it's really tricky when it comes to predicting these races because depending on the election environment, things can go so many different ways depending on how President Trump and the approval ratings are doing, how Republicans in Congress and Democrats in Congress are viewed. These things always have a very important role to play. But just on the simplest base terms, if you shift the Senate result from the 2020 elections by about that margin to get it to about 4.4% Democrat, you're looking at roughly about a 5-point win for Jon Ossoff. Now, again, you are going to have to throw in Ohio and Florida to the map, so those numbers, both of them were probably, Florida's got more votes than Ohio, so it skew a little bit more Republican, so it would probably be like Georgia under 5 points and everything said and done, but that would be on the Senate map. On the presidential map that we did, it'd be like a lean Democratic win for Ossoff. So looking at 2026, where do things currently stand? Well, in the polling right now, and maybe it's counting the election environment, maybe it's not, Ossoff is at 47.3, Dooley's at 43, 9.7% currently undecided. The tricky thing is a lot of the times, yes, we have obviously political models, like a lot of prediction websites use different types of algorithms and models to predict elections and the vote totals in these areas. They can go county by county and give a rough estimate of what they do. They could probably even utilize AI in a lot of aspects. But one big factor for elections typically is track record of election results. And the only recent election results we have out of Georgia that really are comparable to this really involve the 2020 and 2022 Senate elections. Because on the governor's side, Brian Kemp got reelected by about 7.5% in 2022, and he won by 1.4% in 2018. So we really don't have on that side of things a Democrat winning by like 5 points to go off of as a potential comparison. Now, we do have the 2022 and 2020 Senate races, where Raphael Warnock won on the initial ballot against Herschel Walker by about 1 point and had to go to a runoff. But again, 2022, despite Roe v. Wade happening, was a midterm election that typically would be considered more of a Republican-leaning midterm. So in this scenario, it goes to a runoff, no one breaks 50%, and then Warnock wins by about 2.8% over Herschel Walker. In 2020, obviously, very special circumstances of that election, the Republican incumbent David Perdue was facing off against Jon Ossoff. Perdue actually led on election night by 1.8% over Ossoff, and without the third-party candidate Hazel in the race, very possible Perdue wins on election night and avoids that runoff altogether. But they go to a runoff. Jon Ossoff and the Democrats very motivated to get out to vote. I remember it's one of the earlier videos on my channel that I did talking about the momentum in the race. Ossoff ends up winning by 1.2. So we're looking at the state of Georgia, and we can look here comparing from 2020 to 2024. A lot of the state obviously shifted back towards Donald Trump from 2020 to 2024. Trump did very well across the entire country. Not all areas of Georgia did, though. Cobb County, Cherokee County, Forsyth County did still remain on the Democratic side. Now, obviously, the big one to look at here is Fulton County. Trump won it back by 1.6%. Looking from 2016 to 2024, this is where things get more concerning for President Trump and the Republicans. Cherokee from 2016 to 2024 has moved about 10.5% towards Kamala Harris. Cobb County's moved about 12.7%. Already heavily Democratic Fulton County has moved 3.3%. DeKalb moved another point. Gwinnett County moved 10.7%, and Forsyth 14.1%. Now, if we go back to the Mitt Romney days, it's even more stark. Fulton County moved 15 points more Democratic. Cobb County 27 points. Forsyth 29. Cherokee 18.7%. The growth of Atlanta and the surrounding Atlanta suburbs is the main reason why that Democrats have now put Georgia in play and can even win Georgia in elections. Is in past elections, I remember John King on CNN used to say this during the 2012 election, I do believe it was, Republicans will win the rural areas, Democrats will win the urban areas, the elections are won in the suburbs. Now things have certainly shifted a lot over time here. Well, President Trump continues to win the rural areas, but he has really got the numbers up a lot in the rural areas that Republicans like Romney and McCain weren't doing. Democrats are still winning the urban areas by very large amounts, but the suburbs have trended to be more Democratic across the country in a lot of aspects. Now in 2024, a lot of its national environment, they shifted back towards the Republicans in a large degree, but still a lot of suburbs have trended to the Democrats over the last 10 years. And Georgia essentially could be considered ground zero for that. So for Jon Ossoff in that Senate race, that's going to be a very important aspect to talk about. Now, obviously, that's for Ossoff versus Collins. It's roughly about a 4.3% lead, which again would fall under the rankings of a lean Democratic lead, only by a little bit though, not by a drastic amount. The margins are 15 or above are safe, 15 to 5 is likely, 5 to 1 is considered lean, and then lean or under would be tilt. But in my most recent updates, I did ultimately remove the tilt feature just because a lot of the time I was putting tilt as like, well, if it finishes under 1 point, it could be tilt, but I just figured leaving it as lean, 5 and under, would still consider it to be a toss-up anyway, so I just made the executive decision to remove the tilt feature, but that doesn't really impact things too much. So a lean Democratic lead for Ossoff against Mike Collins would still 9.7% undecided, which is going to be interesting for the general election in terms of, does Ossoff, if he does win, is it on election night, or do we have to go to a runoff in that race as well? For Derek Dooley, there's a few less polls, and Ossoff has, overall, similar amount of support, 47.3 against Collins. He has 46.7 in this one, so not a ton of support different from Ossoff. He's down maybe about like 0.5%, a little bit more. But in the Emerson poll that was the most recent, he's leading over Dooley by about 8 points, whereas he led over Collins by about 5. Dooley's floor support among Republicans is the main reason, in a large degree, why Dooley's polling so poorly against Ossoff. Dooley only has 39.9% of the vote in this race, with about a 6.75% lead for Ossoff, still 13.4% undecided. So things are definitely more, I would say Republicans are more solidified behind Mike Collins and Derek Dooley, without a doubt. If you want to give Dooley the benefit of the doubt, you could say there's more undecided voters for the Ossoff versus Dooley race than the Collins versus Ossoff race. But when you look at the margins of only like a 0.7% difference between Ossoff's numbers of the two, and Collins getting about 3 points higher on the Republican side of things, it's really kind of similar when you kind of even that all out, because we know how, in a grand scheme of things, essentially how competitive Georgia is. We know Republicans will get more than 40% of the vote on election night, and as the Democratic incumbent, Ossoff is expected to get more than 47% of the vote as well. I kind of think this is where essentially the candidates' floors are. Now, heading into the general, what does this ultimately shake out as, if it's Ossoff versus Collins or Ossoff versus Dooley? Well, Dooley being the former Tennessee football coach, technically not being from the state of Georgia, even though he does obviously live in Georgia now, he's running for Senate in Georgia, there are a lot of voters that do take that very seriously. You may think, well, it doesn't matter if like the candidate is from the state or how long they've been in the state, were they born in the state, does that even really matter? To a lot of voters, probably doesn't, where they care more about what like the candidate qualities they are, what issues they support. Some people just vote for whichever party they want, whether they're 100% diehard Democrats or diehard Republicans, they'll vote for the candidate no matter who. That obviously happens, but there are still that small amount of voters that only want to vote for a candidate that's from their state. They don't like people that are considered to be carpetbaggers. And could Dooley having a low amount of support among Republicans be a potential reflection of that? So what it means for the 2026 general election, I currently have about 10 states listed as toss-up, and these are states that currently fall under my rankings of 5 points or less. And Georgia I would consider to be in this category. And I know there are predictions that vary on Georgia between Ossoff winning by more than 5 points or more than 5 points, and some other states like North Carolina and even New Hampshire as well. But I keep Georgia under 5 points because the election environment, for how I see it in 2026, is no doubt going to be a good night for the Democrats. I have no doubt about that. I do believe Ossoff is favored. But is he going to win on election night? And if he is, by how much, is going to be the ultimate question. And I think Georgia right now, for the Ossoff versus Mike Collins prediction, which my official prediction again for election night, is we see Mike Collins defeat Derek Dooley by a likely Republican margin of 5 to 15% in that range. So I think we see Georgia go likely red on primary night. Now for the general election between Ossoff versus Dooley, I think we may actually see Ossoff on election night very narrowly avoid a runoff. And for the while now, I've been projecting a runoff could be what ultimately happens here. But essentially, if it's a 5-point win, that could be 52-47 for Ossoff versus Collins. Now, in terms of the general, I'm not sure if there's any third-party candidates that are going to be in the race. I'm not totally sure. There is. Okay. There's an independent candidate and another candidate that's filed paperwork as well. Typically, independent third-party candidates, usually come around 1 to 2% of the overall statewide vote. So in a very close race like in 2020, it was enough to go to a runoff where, again, that runoff candidate literally by the absolute thinnest of margins kept the race from being an outright win for David Perdue. We're getting about 2.32% in that one. This time around, though, in a Democratic midterm, without, I would say, more of a well-known candidate, I think we see Ossoff win on election night. I think we see something with Ossoff getting like 51, maybe 51.5%. And then you're looking at Collins around like 47%, maybe 46.5%. And then the rest of the vote there is kind of split up among the third-party candidates. And so it stays as lean Democrat, and it's enough for Ossoff to win on election night. Now, if it heads to a runoff, we've seen how Republicans have done in runoffs, not just in Georgia, but even across 2025 and 2026. I think Democrats will still be very motivated to get out and vote, especially if they're one seat away maybe from flipping the Senate. Democrats will be the ones more motivated to get out and vote. We saw this in 2020, how that can play out. We even saw it in 2022, where the Democratic lead for Warnock expanded into the runoff. If that were to happen, Georgia on a runoff, I think would go over 5 points for Ossoff and would be a likely Democratic win. That's when you get into that, I would say 53-46, or I guess that'd be 53-47, 54-46. That's when you get into that range of outcomes. But on election night, without the runoff, which is currently what I have, I still think we see Georgia go lean Democratic for Ossoff over Collins. But that's obviously for the general. For tonight, we're talking about Collins versus Dooley for Tuesday, and I currently have my Collins and my final prediction defeating Derek Dooley in that 5 to 15% likely margin. So I really appreciate you watching the video. I know it's been a long one, about 25 minutes now of the video. I do appreciate you watching this video. If you watch it all the way through, I really, really appreciate it as well. I hope you'll consider hitting like and hitting subscribe on my channel, as well as I post one new video every single day on topics like these, on the latest election news coverage that's important for the midterms. As well, I'm starting to get some 2028 videos outgoing as well. And obviously going into the summertime, we're going to have a lot more general election stuff to start covering, a lot of news, so it should be getting really exciting very, very soon. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, again, remember, hit like and subscribe if you did, and I hope to see you in a future video.